Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me? Give me a thumbs up. Yay, thank you. So exciting to see everyone, and we are glad you are here with us tonight. My name is Ellen Rober, and I am the Deputy Director here at the North Carolina Board of Physical Therapy Examiners. But like all of you, I'm also a licensee here in North Carolina, and I've been serving the profession and my patients since the 90s. So I'm sure I have a little age on some of you, but we won't talk about that tonight. So welcome to tonight's webinar, and it's entitled Navigating the North Carolina Continuing Competence Requirement. So before we dive in, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and the chat box has been enabled. So if you all have any technical issues, then just type a note in the chat box. I've got two folks here on board staff helping me tonight, and they'll help us work through any difficulties we encounter. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so everybody should be able to see that first slide now that says navigating the continuing competence requirement. If you can't, or if there's any issues, like I said, just drop a line in that chat box so Bill and Debbie can help take care of you. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the logistics for the webinar tonight. First of all, you should have registered for the webinar with your name and your North Carolina PT or PTA license number along with your email address. This way, we can email you a course certificate at the completion of the webinar as long as you are in attendance for at least 50 minutes. And you'll learn more about that 50 minutes in a little bit. If for some reason you all did not register ahead of time, you're going to find my name and email in this webinar tonight. Just jot it down and drop me a line. I'll be able to verify that you were here on the log, and then I can still get you recorded as an attendee and sent a continuing competence course certificate. You'll notice that we have disabled your mics. However, the chat box is enabled, and I'm sure that a lot of you came here tonight with at least one question, maybe even more specifically about continuing competence. Honestly, that's probably why lots of you even came tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not. There we go. Let's go back one. Really bizarre, y'all. Okay. I don't see my next slide, but I'm going to tell you what these questions are. So there are a lot of questions that we will answer in tonight's presentation. And if your question is one of the following 10, then don't worry that we will definitely get those answered. If your question is anything other than the 10 I'm about to read, then go ahead and you can type them in the chat box at any time during the presentation. Or, if during the presentation you hear something that makes you have a question, then go ahead and type that in the chat box as well. And Debbie is here tonight helping me organize all those questions. And at the end, we'll have at least a 20 to 30 minute QA session where we'll answer all of your questions. If for any reason we don't get to them all tonight, we will create a document, a Q&A document that we will post alongside the recorded webinar in the webinar library so that then you can access it anytime. So here are the questions that will definitely get answered tonight. Number one, where do I find my reporting period? You can probably guess that we get asked these same questions a lot. That's how we came up with this list. Number two, do I have to complete my continuing competence requirement if I just got my license? Number three, how do I carry over points? Number four, is this course, and then I put in parentheses for this one, insert one of about 1 million courses approved in North Carolina. Next question, I completed a jurisprudence exercise. Why isn't it showing up in my report? Next question. I entered the number of hours for my course/activity, but am not getting credit for all of them. Why? Next question. Since COVID changed everything about continuing education, why can't I get all of my points online? Question 8. What documentation do I need to prove I completed an activity/course? Question 9. How long do I need to keep that documentation? And finally, I'm over 65. Do I still have to do continuing competence? So again, those are the questions that we are definitely going to answer tonight. This slide shows you the objectives for tonight's presentation, and we are going to go through each of these in pretty elaborate detail. Okay, moving on. Okay, so first, what is the role of the North Carolina Board of PT Examiners? Well, I'm not sure that you all know exactly when the board was created, but I'm sure you know at this point what the board's role is in governing and making sure that the public is protected here in North Carolina. So basically, the North Carolina Board of PT Examiners was created in 1951. It was created by the General Assembly for the purpose of establishing and maintaining the minimum standards for the practice of PT to protect the safety and welfare of the citizens of North Carolina. One of the ways that the board safeguards the public is through establishing and enforcing the continuing competence requirement for each North Carolina licensee for physical therapy, both PTs and PTAs. Next slide. So what is that PT and PTA licensee continuing competence requirement here in North Carolina? So you'll see my $20 bill and the calendar 30 on the left. I tried to choose objects that might you might relate to and be able to remember these things easily. So basically 20 points is what is required for all PTAs in North Carolina, and 30 points is required for all PTs in North Carolina. Every licensee, whether you are an initial licensee in North Carolina or you have been licensed in the past and then practiced somewhere else and came back and revived your license in North Carolina, everyone is assigned a continuing competence reporting period that is based on the date that they were licensed or that their license was revived. Those 20 points for PTAs, 30 points for PTs must be completed every 25 months. There is a month of overlap, and that is intentional to give some flexibility in finishing that requirement before you renew your license if you're at the end of the reporting period. Which brings me to the next point. All North Carolina PT and PTA licensees are required to renew their license annually. This is not exactly related to this presentation about continuing competence, but I will tell you that one of the most frequently asked questions of our board staff is this: I just got my license in, again, you plug in the month. I answered several today. I just got my license in October. Do I still have to renew my license? And if so, do I need to do the continuing competence? So basically, it doesn't matter when you get your license in the license year, and the board defines a license year as February the 1st. So this license year would be February the 1st, 2023 to January 31st, 2024. And if you get your license anywhere during that period of time, then you are required to renew your license between November 1st, 2023, January 31st, 2024. Now, if you're a brand new licensee, you are not required, however, to report your continuing competence requirement until the end of your reporting period. Okay, so those of you who are at the end of your reporting period, so that is going to be those folks whose reporting periods are January the 1st, 2022 to January 31st, 2024. You have to make sure that your requirement is satisfied and your continuing competence report is completed before you will be allowed to renew your license. Next slide. So this slide talks about the statutory authority. In other words, what gives the board the the ability, the power to come up with what the continuing competence requirement is going to be for licensees in North Carolina, and then how they are going to enforce that continuing competence requirement. So GS, anywhere you see GS as part of the rule or the law, that actually means general statute. So this is your Practice Act, the North Carolina PT Practice Act. So this specific part of the Practice Act is what gives the board the power to determine what the continuing competence requirement is. And then you can read all the specifics that's under that statute. Then you go down, and then in that same statute, different section, is the grounds for disciplinary action. And if you were to reference that statute, it will talk about that the board does have the authority to discipline licensees who do not comply with the continuing competence requirement. Then the rule 21 NCAC. So anytime you see that 21 NCAC 48, then you know that we're talking about board rules. And just like the general statute, board rules are also the law. So in other words, you don't have any choice. You got to follow the law. And everything that the board does and everything that we here in the board staff office do relates to these general statute, our Practice Act, in other words, and also the board rules. So basically, every single policy, everything we do has a reason, and it all points back to the North Carolina Practice Act for PTs and also the board rules. All right, so what are the board rules related to continuing competence? Because there are actually several. They start with 21 NCAC 48G.0105, and you know that you've looked at them way too many times when you can pretty much tell people where specific questions are answered within these board rules. And they go all the way up through 48G.0111. We're going to go through each one of them very briefly tonight, and all of those relate to continuing competence. The one that I want to point out to you, that if you don't look at any of the others, if you have a question, that .0109 is the rule that lists every single continuing competence activity that's approved by the board. And no, that doesn't mean every single course. We're talking about activity and activity category. And it gives a description of each. It also gives you the maximum number of points that's allowed per reporting period for each. And it will list the documentation requirements for each. I have given you a link so that you can access the most current NCPT Practice Act and board rules. That is on the board's website. And I realize you all can't, click on it and get there, but you can certainly type that in your search engine and find them. Okay, so basically this slide is where we're going to start, and we're going to go through each of these board rules that relate to continuing competence, but I've picked out the most important pieces that, again, we get the most questions about from our licensees. So if you look under .0105, that lists the definitions that all relate to continuing competence. Number 2, so it actually is number 2 in that specific rule, is clinical practice. And basically, it defines clinical practice. And what is clinical practice? Because within the continuing competence activities, the options, there is a clinical practice category where you can get 1, 2, or 3 points per year for your clinical practice hours if it meets the definition. So basically, clinical practice means physical therapy consultation or patient care or client management or the supervision thereof. Number 3 is a contact hour, and the way the board defines contact hour is at least 50 consecutive minutes of an engagement in a continuing competence activity. That will become important in just a little bit when we go through what to do if you take a course that has a quarter hour as the number of contact hours in the course. Number 12, reporting period. That's a 25-month period commencing on January 1st, during which the licensee must complete all the continuing competence requirements. Points earned by a licensee may be counted toward completion during one reporting period only. Then point 0106 is the continuing competence requirement. Again, A and B, that's basically where, and I have summarized those two together, which is why I put in summary. It tells you how those continuing competence reporting periods are assigned and that they're going to commence on January 1st following the date of initial licensure. There is one exception to that, and that is the month of January, which is our overlap month. And then C, you can earn up to 10 points extra during a reported period, and you can carry them over to the next. But this is only if you are eligible. And trust me, a lot of times when I get questions about, I thought I had 10 extra points, why don't I? It's because the categories for jurisprudence exercise, clinical practice, and self-assessment are excluded. Okay, the next rule is .0107, which are the standards for continuing competence. Now, again, probably, I don't know, it ranks up there with the highest, definitely frequently asked question is, I have taken X course or this certification, is it approved in North Carolina? So what I always tell folks when they're asking about an activity or a specific course, a specific certification, and if it has been approved, is that you have to go through 3 steps. Your first step is to make sure that it meets this .0107 rule, and that it basically has intellectual or practical content based on the best scientific evidence, and the primary objective is to increase the participants' professional competence. Number 2, the activities constitute learning experiences dealing with matters directly related to the practice of PT or patient welfare. And then number 7 is for activities that are directed to more than one discipline, the content would again enhance PT skills or aid in the practice of physical therapy. So there's several other, as you can tell, I did number 1, number 2, and number 7. There's also a 3, 4, 5, and 6 that you also have to meet. And if you have any question or any doubt, I would suggest you go back to the rule and read that and make sure that an activity you're questioning does meet all of those standards. So that is basically the first step in determining if a course or a certification is acceptable per North Carolina board rules for you to use as a continuing competence activity. Then the second has to do with this .0108 rule. It's like, okay, so if it does meet those standards, so say you take a course and you decide, okay, it meets the standards. I don't know, I'm going to say I'm going to take a course on dry needling. That's always a common, a popular one. So I want to take a course on dry needling. Does dry needling, the course, and does dry needling as a practice of physical therapy meet those standards? Well, yes, it does, especially if you're a physical therapist, because that is within the scope of practice of physical therapist in North Carolina. So yes, it would. Then what you have to determine is if it meets the standards, how are you going to record it? So if it is delivered or the course is sponsored by an approved provider, then you can put it in an approved provider category. So .0108, that rule gives you a list of who the pre-approved providers are in North Carolina. Basically, it is any other U.S. state or Canadian PT practice licensing board, the APTA, or any section or state chapter of the APTA, the FSBPT, IACET, which is one of the international accreditation groups for continuing education, a PT or PTA program that's approved by an agency recognized by the U.S. Department of Education or Council on Post-Secondary Accreditation, the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, the North Carolina Department of Public Health, and the North Carolina AHEC programs for activities that are directly related to PT. So there is your list of who is pre-approved. So okay, we're back to that dry needling course. We know that it meets the standards of practice, and then we've got to know, okay, is it approved by one of these other entities that the North Carolina board recognizes as a pre-approved provider in North Carolina, because maybe that certificate doesn't specifically say approved by the North Carolina Board of Physical Therapy Examiners or approved by the North Carolina Physical Therapy Association, or the APTA-NC is what they are referred to now. So that would be your next question. We advise that licensees, if you're unsure, that you contact the course provider and ask them those specific questions. It's not going to work usually for you to contact that course provider and say, I need to know if my course is approved by the North Carolina board. They're going to say, well, we're not sure, you need to check with your board. So if you go to that website and you pull up CEU or course approval or continuing education or whatever the drop down is on that particular course provider's website, then you can see who they do have approval through. A lot of times it'll say Texas Board of Physical Therapy Examiners or Florida State Chapter of the APTA. And if it's approved by one of those, then it's automatically approved in North Carolina. If it's not approved by one of those, then you have two choices. One, you can choose a category, which that .0109, that next rule, has all the different categories. There are categories of continuing competence activities that do not require being delivered by an approved provider. I would suggest you take a look at 21 NCAC 48G.0109A and then number 3 or number 6 if you have taken a course and it's not from a pre-approved provider in North Carolina. The other option is that you apply for course approval, and the APTA NC has a robust and a great system for approving courses that have not yet been approved. All right, the .0109 rule, let's go on about that. Let's see if there's anything else. Oh yes, the required documentation. So whatever is required for that particular activity can be found in that .0109 rule. Another thing to note is the documentation should be kept by the licensee, only submitted to the board in response to an audit. And another thing to note, we've already talked about this a little bit, individual activities and categories of activities have maximum points allowed per reporting period. Okay, next, the .0110, that's evidence of compliance. That's where you talk about, okay, what do you have to keep? You got to keep that documentation for 4 years. The board does conduct random audits. We're going to talk a little bit about that in just a few minutes. And failure to respond can result in discipline. All right, I'm going to look at my list really quick to make sure that my questions that I told y'all, promised you all we would answer in the beginning, that I have got those answered for the slides we have done so far. And yes, we have. One of the other things I want to talk about just before we hit the next slide is that question about, since COVID changed everything about continuing education, why can't I get all my points online? The North Carolina board rules do not state that any specific category of continuing competence activity has to be completed each reporting period, with the exception of a jurisprudence exercise. So that is the only actual requirement by board rules. So you can piece together a lot of other activities that do not require in-person learning. Now, if you're a PT in particular, because you have to have 30 points, you may have to use some categories that you don't get 1 point per hour of continuing competence time or course time, because you may have to spill over into some of those categories where it may take 2 hours to equal 1 point or 3 hours to equal 1 point, but you can get 30 points even if you're a PT in activities that are not live in person. All right, we're going to move to the next slide. This is the last rule that has to do with continuing competence, and it is 0.0111. So basically, this talks all about the exemptions and when you can apply for an exemption. Long story short, there are basically two reasons that you can get exemptions from continuing competence. One is if you are over the 65 years of age and you are not engaged in PT practice. The second is if you have a hardship case. However, what you have to remember is if you're applying for exemption for a hardship case, that you have to submit the request in writing to the board. You have to submit documentation to support the request. And since board meetings are quarterly, that means they meet 4 times a year, then your request is not going to go in front of the board until that board meeting. Again, the other thing to remember about an exemption is even if you get an exemption from continuing competence, you cannot practice clinically. If you decide to go back to clinical practice, then you have to notify the board and you have to fulfill the continuing competence requirement in order to be able to return to practice. I've given you a link for the continuing competence exemption form. If you do end up deciding you need to apply for an exemption, that is where you get the form. And the form and the documentation actually will be submitted to me, and that is on the form, and then I will present it to the board. Okay, next piece tonight is about accessing and editing your continuing competence report. All right. This is mine on the left that you see on the slide. So now we're going to do a demo. That's me empowering you in case you didn't know. All right. So what I'm going to do first is stop sharing my screen. And then I'm actually going to okay. Then what I'm going to do is share my screen and show you all. Okay, can you all see my Google? Okay, so what I'm going to do is show you how to access your continuing competence report. So we're going to go to the board website. This is the homepage of the board website. There's 2 ways that you can log in to the site. Now, for those of you who only get on the board's website once a year, I'm hoping tonight will make you want to get onto it more because we have a lot of great things on here. I'm going to scroll down just to show you real quick. We've got some great information about informed consent, all the updated scope of practice questions, newsletter. There's all kinds of good information. But to access your continuing competence report, things do look different because now we have this personal dashboard where you can do everything from that if you're a licensee and actually if you're an applicant, but none of you are going to be applicants right now. So you can either log in from up here in the right hand upper corner of the homepage of the website, or you can go down here and click on this personal dashboard and it will take you to a login page. So here you are going to put in your username and your password. And the username is either your license number or your email. And here you'll see I'm at my dashboard now. I'm going to scroll down and find my license and populate all the options there. And over here, you'll see I have continuing competence reporting. So I'm going to access my my continuing competence report. Okay, so I'm opening this page and you can see that this is my summary page. And you can see this is my current reporting period. You actually can also see the history of your past reporting periods. If I wanted to claim carryover, you all, this is where I do it right here off this Get Carryover. And actually, look at here. It tells me I have 10 points that I could carry over. And if I scroll down, this is a bonus, y'all. I didn't even expect to do this. If I scroll down, you can see where I can carry them over. So I can carry over 5 points here in the conference offered live in real time by approved provider electronic media. I can carry over 3.5 points here, but it's going to total 10. And if you carry them over, be sure that you keep documentation to support that carryover, because if you get audited, you will be asked for that. All right, I'm going to go back. And now I'm back to my summary page, and I'm going to access my current reporting period report. You can see here that I am actually not due to complete my requirement this year because my reporting period expires in 2025. So I'm going to view my report, and what I see when I'm looking here is this is me. This is my reporting period. This is how many points are required for me to meet my continuing competence requirement. Thus far, I have earned 18.5 points towards that continuing competence requirement, and I have completed my jurisprudence exercise. Another thing that happens sometimes when people get to renewal is they aren't allowed to renew because they haven't completed their jurisprudence exercise. Remember, guys, if you are going to do your jurisprudence exercise, not if you're going to do it, when you're going to do it for your continuing competence requirement, you have to enter it just like you would any other activity. So this very top option is the jurisprudence exercise. Once you are licensed, it doesn't matter if you complete jurisprudence exercise 1, 2, or 3, but one of them must be reported to be compliant with your continuing competence requirement per reporting period. All right, you can slide down and you can see all of my options here. I want to point a couple of things out to you so you all will understand this. Your continuing education, for this is a category. This is a main category, you guys. So all of these things under this main category, from the course offered live in real time to the home study by approved provider, all of those activities are under the bigger category of continuing education. Everything in here, you can get a maximum of 29 points per reporting period. So if you go down here, the live in real time by approved provider electronic media, here you go. There's an online option right there. That's what you all are doing tonight. So if I were going to record this course, I would hit add new item. I would put in my activity. Looky there. There it is. I would put in the date completed, and then I would put in the number of hours, and then I would save it. Now, look, when you go back, it did not save, it did not increase anything on my report, and that is because I already have met my maximum for this particular category. Now, if I still wanted to use this in a different category, I could choose another category that it might belong. So I could go down here and I could actually even use it in the home study category. This is a much broader defined category, and we could make that fit the definition in this category, and I could add it here. If not, and I know I'm going to have enough points, this report will store any possible carryover, and then I could carry it over if I exceed my 30, minus my jurisprudence exercise, minus my clinical practice, minus my self-assessment. I could carry that over into the next period. I'm going to point out a couple of other things on the report since we're in here. And that is this clinical practice, because we're going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute. But for clinical practice, so I'm no longer clinically practicing, y'all. I was in private practice for 20 years, worked another 10 years in the hospital, home health, all those good things. That I could have recorded as clinical practice. The category you put it in is you have to look at the hours and make sure that you meet that requirement. So all of those years I practiced, I had no problem meeting my 1,750 hours per year requirement. So if I were going to put that in, I would put in the activity, and I might just say clinical practice. The date completed, this is per year, remember? So if I were going to say I completed it this year, and then it's for 1 year, Now, a lot of people will put in here 20 years. If I've been in practice 20 years, I'll put in 20 years. It's not how many years you've been in practice. It's how many years you've done that 1,750 hours per year during this reporting period. And then if you save it, it will then convert into points. So see, that's one of those examples of you got to look and see what the category is asking you to put. So here I put in my 1 year in this category, so it gave me 3 points. I'm going to go ahead and delete that, y'all, so that I don't forget. And then we're going to move on. Okay. Now, can y'all see my live demo screen? Can you see that? Okay, got it. All right. So common mistakes with recording continuing competence activities. Placing in courses in categories that are reserved for approved providers when you're unsure. You all know now how to make sure. When courses are completed in January of the year ending one reporting period and beginning another, double recording the course. Remember, one of those board rules says you can only use the course in one reporting period. Recording points instead of hours in category where hours are required. I get that question a lot for those of you who are clinical instructors and you want to get points for being a clinical instructor. A lot of times people try to put in their points instead of just putting in their hours. The tool is actually really smart and it will convert into your points. Recording CPR in a category other than workplace education, safety, emergency, governmental, regulatory. That's where CPR always belongs. It doesn't matter how many hours you participate in CPR. It doesn't matter if you do it every year. That's where it goes. Rounding up a course certificate that includes a quarter hour. So remember, the board rules do not recognize a quarter hour. So if, for example, your certificate were to read 2.25 contact hours, you record it as 2. Forgetting that jurisprudence exercises must be recorded and incorrectly recording clinical practice hours and not realizing each year is recorded separately. All right, carryover points. We talked a little bit. I even got to show you all where you would access the carryover points to see if you had any and then how to claim them and carry them over. Remember that what the excluded categories are. Remember that reporting tool will store the points for you. And remember, don't try to figure it out on your own. Just record exactly what you've done. The tool, again, will store it for you. I've given you a resource for claiming carryover points. It's on the board website. I've told you exactly where it is. Again, I think you could probably put this into your search bar and pull it up. I will admit I did not try to actually put that link in my search bar, but if you can pull it up, I've given you exactly where on the board website it is. It's a very short PowerPoint, tells you exactly how to claim those carryover points. If you've got specific questions, you can email and we'll answer. Last topic, audit requirements. So at the close of each reporting period, North Carolina PT and PT licensees are randomly audited, and you, as a licensee, must respond to the audit request within 30 days. And your responses should include the documentation to support all the activities during that continuing competence reporting period. Don't send your documentation to us, though, unless you are audited and we request it. So everybody doesn't send their documentation. It's kind of like your notes. You know, you do documentation for in the clinic for notes on your patients. Insurance company doesn't want you to send them all to them. You only send them if you're audited and asked. Same thing with your documentation for continuing competence. Here's a little bit more information about audits. If you don't have all the required documentation when you are audited, you should submit a request to the board's executive director for additional time up to 30 days. If you're audited and found to have a 10-point or less deficit, board rules will allow 90 more days for you to satisfy the deficit. Basically, that means you go do something else and, you know, get the rest of your continuing competence. If you are not compliant for any reason, whether it be you refuse to answer the board's request, send in the information, complete the deficit, then you will be referred to the investigative committee for disciplinary action. This year, of all of the audits I did or that I helped participate in, I would say 80% of those had to have a request to send in documentation to support their clinical practice points that they had claimed. Um, so if you are putting those points in, I mean, that's great that people are clinically practicing. That is one of the best ways to stay competent is to practice clinically. But if you claim those points, be sure that you have documentation to support it. There's a simple form on the board's website that you can use. You can also just have your employer um, document that yes, indeed, you completed those hours. We don't like people to send any payroll information in. It just has way too much personal information. If we get that, we generally have to shred it right away because of the personal information. So just use that simple form. All right. Last reminder, as a North Carolina PT or PTA licensee, your compliance with meeting the continuing competence requirement helps the board in its duty to protect the safety and welfare of the public. In doing so, you are also demonstrating a commitment to ongoing lifelong learning. All right, there is our contact information. I'm going to stop sharing this screen now, and you'll be able to see me, and we'll use the rest of the time to answer your questions. So Debbie has already brought me a list. Oh, wow, I'm surprised there aren't more than this. I hope I did a good job of answering a lot of your questions. Okay, I live in North Carolina, but work remotely in New York. Do I have to have a North Carolina license? If your home state is North Carolina, yes, you should have a North Carolina license. Technically, you definitely have to have a license where you are treating patients. So the New York license is also required, but even the compact, the way that the compact defines your home state is where you live, where you have a driver's license, where you receive your mail. So yes, you should have a North Carolina license, and you should follow the renewal and continuing competence requirement of your home state if you have a license and compact privileges to practice in other states. Okay, North Carolina license was approved in October. My continuing competence reporting period does not start until 1/1/2024. Can I add the course tonight? Well, it's not 1/1/2024, so no, unfortunately you cannot, but it is not a wasted course. You have learned something tonight. Take it again next year and you'll be able to add it. Could this course be recorded in the non-interactive electronic media category? If you have exhausted the points in your interactive category, it could meet the requirement in that category, yes. Do carryover points go into the same category in the next reporting period? So remember when I pulled up my carryover points that I had available? Actually, I think I have time to do that again if you all will just bear with me a minute. Give me just a minute. I'm going to pull that up one more time so y'all can see that, because those of you who have carryover points, this could be life-changing for you. All right, we're going to access my continuing competence report again. And so this time I'll log in from up here to show y'all you can do it both ways. Okay, so if I'm going to get my carryover points, I know one that I can easily claim. So I've got 10 points to claim, and my report's going to show me all the areas I could claim them. And I know that I taught in UNC's DPT program for a lot of years, so I can claim those 6 points carryover. So I hit change, remember, and I am going to claim all 6 points in that category. Now it's telling me I've claimed 6, which means I could claim 4 more if I wanted. But let me return to my summary so you all can see how this changed my report. So now remember when I showed you all before, I had 18.5 points towards my requirement. Now I have 24.5 because it added the 6. If I scroll down to the teaching category, you'll see that I have 6 here, and it's showing that it is from carryover points. So what I want to make sure that I do is keep my documentation of the syllabus and what shows that I taught in that DPT program at UNC so that I can get those 6 carryover points and provide proof should I be audited. And guess what? I could be audited. Okay. Next question. If the course is less than 1 hour, does that mean we round down? Would 2.75 be recorded as 2 hours? 2.75 could actually be recorded as 2.5 hours because what I didn't show you that was in that rule is it addresses the half hour too. So half hours are recognized, quarter hours are not. Okay, half hour, you have to have the 25 minutes. That's correct, isn't it, Debbie? 25 minutes for half hour. 25 minutes for half hour, 50 minutes for the hour. So if you had 2.75, it would be recorded as 2.5. CPR goes in which category? Hopefully you all could tell me this now. Workplace education, general patient safety. I always forget what all of the general patient safety, emergency procedures, governmental regulatory requirements in that category, workplace education. Okay, next question. What documentation do we need to prove this course? We are going to mail you, actually, we're going to email you a course certificate. That is what you would be required. So if you read the board rule that is associated with live interactive course by electronic media, it will say to you, credit shall not be given for the same course or conference more than once during any reporting period. The licensee shall retain the certificate of attendance issued by the approved provider. We are the North Carolina Board of PT Examiners, so we are an approved provider. We will issue you a certificate of course completion. That is what you would keep. I am a medical PT advisor for a new national foundation. Can that be recorded and in which category? I would have to look at the definitions very closely for you, but if you look at the rule that I was talking about, 21 NCAC 48G.0109, look in professional service, in the professional service category. That is letter J, and there is volunteer service options in that category. So I would look there. And if you're a PT advisor, you could also actually look at 21 NCAC 48G.0109A, number 3. So look at that one as well and see if you think what you do fits either one of those definitions. I plan on changing careers next year, but I want to keep my PT license. Are there a certain amount of clinical hours required? So this is a really good question. And one of my other roles here at the board as board staff is to help people when they decide they want to revive their license. And so I'm going to tell y'all a couple of things. First of all, there's not a clinical hour requirement currently in the North Carolina PT Practice Act or board rules. That does not mean that that's the same for every state. Every state is different in that regard. So you need to make sure if you by chance move that and you want to transfer your license, you can't really transfer your license. Most of the time you have to apply for a new license or, well, if you moved, you would need to apply for a new license. I'm talking through this, sorry, y'all. But you would want to make sure that that state's requirements were the same as North Carolina's. That's the thing to remember. But here in North Carolina, again, there's not a board rule or any part of the Practice Act that require a certain amount of clinical hours. If you decided that you were going to work in another field for a while and you wanted to let your license expire for a period of time, I would strongly advise you read the revival requirements online at the board's website to make sure that you don't miss critical time periods. Because if you go more than 5 years without an active license and you don't have an active license anywhere else in the country, it takes a lot of hours and a lot of courses to revive your physical therapy license. And we tell people all the time, you never know what curveball life might throw, or you may just decide you miss it terribly and want to come back. And if you do, you want to make sure that you know the requirements for revival. Your certificate for this course will be emailed to you. That's the next question. Let's see. Hold on. Will a computer-based education course for work count for workplace education? Yes, it could count for workplace education. Just make sure you read the definition in the board rules so you'll know what documentation to keep in order to serve as proof of completion. Can you use this course in the home study category? You could if you needed to. If your other categories were maxed out on the amount of points. The most appropriate place to record this course is, hold on, I'm going to tell you exactly. If you look at the board rule, it's 21 NCAC 48G.0109A, number 1. A registered attendee at a course or conference offered live in real time by approved provider through electronic media. So the maximum points of that is 15. If by chance you had met your maximum points of 15 in that category, you could record it in the home study category. When does the 4 years to hold documentation start from? So basically do it for 2 continuing competence reporting periods. So I'm currently in January 1st, 2023 to January 31st, 2025. I would want to keep all my documentation from this reporting period and the January 1st, 2021 to January 31st, 2023. Okay? So basically do it for 2 continuing competence reporting periods and you're covered. All right. We're rolling through these questions, y'all. If I have been audited, is there a restriction on when I can be audited again? No, it's random, so you could be audited at any time. I am licensed by endorsement from another state. If I do not renew my Arizona license, does it affect my North Carolina license? Not as long as you have an active North Carolina license. If you have a North Carolina compact privilege, then you would have to renew your home state license in order to keep your compact privilege in North Carolina. And let me just use this as an opportunity because I would be telling a tale if I told y'all that that I know for sure that Arizona is part of the PT Compact. So this will be a great time for me to show y'all how to find that information. All right, I'm going to share my screen. So I'm going to go to PT Compact, and then I'm going to go to this compact map. And I'm going to scroll down. And I see that Arizona is a member state issuing and accepting compact privileges, as is North Carolina. Therefore, that could be a real scenario where someone was here in North Carolina, licensed in Arizona, but here practicing in North Carolina with a compact privilege. If that is the case, you would have to renew your Arizona license in order to continue with your compact privilege here in North Carolina. If you're now living in North Carolina and you have an active license in North Carolina, not a compact privilege, then you can allow your Arizona license to expire. All right. Any more, Debbie, that you see? Okay. Anybody else have a burning question that we didn't answer? Home study. Let's talk about home study again. I'm going to read the definition to y'all, which, by the way, remember, y'all can find on that board rule link that I put in there. For completion of a home study physical therapy program furnished by an approved provider, 1 hour of home study earns 1 point. The maximum number of points during any one reporting period allowed shall be 10. The licensee shall retain a certificate of completion issued by the approved provider. So there are 2 home study categories, y'all. So the one that I just read is the approved provider home study category. That is one where you do 1 hour of home study, you get 1 point. Remember, that's a pretty broad category. It doesn't have any definition of, does it have to be electronic? Can it be live? Can it be a text or script? There are no identifying factors beyond home study. That's why it's so broad. Okay, so that's a good place to put something if you've exceeded points in these other categories that are more specific and descriptive. But the thing about that A8 that I just read is it has to be from an approved provider. If it's not from an approved provider, say that you wanted to take a course in nutrition, and because in your physical therapy practice, you're using pieces of nutritional information to help inform you and inform your patients. But this particular nutrition course, a dietitian teaches, and it's not from an approved provider per board rules, then you could record that in the self-designed home study program category, which is A6 of that 21 NCAC 48G.0109. Because in that particular category, the provider does not have to be an approved provider. For that category, though, what you'll see is that it takes 3 contact hours to equal 1 point. All right, let's see what's next. I use physicaltherapy.com 24 CEUs. Do you know if all these courses meet my requirements? I do not know. That is the licensee's job to find that out based on those 3 steps that we talked about during the presentation. It has to meet the standards. If it does meet the standards as outlined in the board rule, which is 21 NCAC 48G.0107, if it meets the standards, then you have to determine whether it is from an approved provider. Not every course in physicaltherapy.com may be from an approved provider. I don't know, but you'll have to figure that out. If it is from an approved provider, you put in one of those categories. If it's not, you have to put it in a different category that's not an approved provider. Self-assessment. So the professional self-assessment, I'm going to share my screen one more time. This is going to be the last question, y'all, that I'm going to take tonight. If you have others and we have them recorded, which if you put them in the chat box, we do, then we will answer those questions. And again, we'll make a Q&A document and post it alongside this webinar in your webinar library, which you can access also through your dashboard, which I showed you all how to get to the continuing competence report. There's also a choice for webinar library, and that's where you can find it recorded, okay, and this document. All right. Oh, self-assessment. I'm going to share my screen in just a second, and I'm going to show you all the information about self-assessment that's on the board website because it's really good, and I want you to see it. So we're going back to the board website. Okay, so the professional self-assessment is under the continuing competence drop-down. Professional self-assessment, reflective practice exercise. So basically, these are the instructions. And if you read through this carefully, it will help you understand what you need to do to complete a self-assessment or reflective practice exercise. So The bottom line is if you have a self-assessment, a reflective practice exercise that is not one of the two that the board has already pre-approved, then you have to first submit it to the board for approval before you can count it. So don't waste a lot of time doing it unless you know it is approved. The board has already approved the ones that are listed below. This North Carolina Board of Physical Therapy therapies, examiners, self-assessment, RPE, that one has been approved. If you do that one, then you have to complete all 5 parts that are outlined here. And you'll notice that in some areas, there's one part if you're a PT and a different part if you're a PTA. And the only other one the board has approved is just this past year, well, at December 2022's board meeting. If you are a school-based PT, if you do that North Carolina Department of Public Instruction rubric to evaluate North Carolina school-based PTs and the school-based PT summary rating form, then that also counts as a reflective practice exercise or a professional self-assessment. And remember, you can only count those once per reporting period, and those points cannot be carried over. All right, you all. I think we're at the end of our time. I appreciate all of your attention. I appreciate all of you being here. It makes me very excited that you all are this interested in continuing competence. And it'll make me have a little spring in my step tomorrow as I do my job here at the board. All right, I'll see you guys later. Good night. Bye-bye.